For 3 years, a millionaire businessman remained in a coma after losing his daughter. A mysterious girl appears with a blue notebook, and when she touches him, something unexpected happens. His vital signs react, and dark secrets about the accident begin to surface. But it's the love hidden in the notebook that awakens the man, and the entire forgotten truth. If this story intrigues you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper East Side of Manhattan was one of the most respected in the country. Its pristine white walls reflected the cool light of the hallways, where the smell of disinfectant mingled with the heavy silence that only hospitals carry. In the VIP wing, where few had access, one particular room held a story that had been unfolding for over 3 years. There, amidst monitors that emitted rhythmic beeps and machines that sustained vital functions, Richard Anderson remained in a state doctors called a deep coma. Richard was 52 when the accident happened. Before that, he was known as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the United States. His company, Anderson Tech Solutions, had revolutionized the corporate software market and made him a respected figure in New York's business circles. Tall, with well-cut graying hair and brown eyes that used to convey confidence, Richard was described by those who knew him as a fair but reserved man. He carried a seriousness that hid old wounds, emotional scars that few could see. Richard's wife, Helen Anderson, was an elegant 48-year-old woman with a striking presence. Her dark brown hair was always tied in a discreet bun, and her green eyes held a mixture of strength and accumulated sorrow. Helen had been a literature professor before getting married, but she had given up her career to dedicate herself to her family and, later, to the social projects that her passion for education never let her forget. Now her routine was reduced to daily visits to the hospital, where she spent hours by her husband's side, talking to him as if he could hear her, holding his hand and reading excerpts from books he used to enjoy. 3 years and 4 months, that was the exact amount of time since Richard and their daughter Isabella had been in the accident. The tragedy occurred on a rainy March afternoon on the Taconic State Parkway, as they were returning from a weekend trip to the Berkshires. The car veered off the road at high speed and rolled over several times. Isabella, who was only 16, did not survive her injuries. Richard, despite having physically survived, never woke up. The doctors explained that the traumatic brain injury had been devastating and that the chances of recovery were practically zero. Helen, however, never fully accepted the verdict. She believed, or wanted, to believe that somewhere deep in her husband's consciousness, he was still there, waiting for a reason to come back. The loss of Isabella had been a brutal blow for Helen. The girl was her only child, the result of years of trying and fertility treatments. Isabella was sweet, intelligent, and full of life. She loved to draw, write short stories, and had a habit of leaving affectionate notes scattered around the house. Her absence left a void that Helen didn't know how to fill. In the first few months after the accident, she could barely get out of bed. It was her commitment to Richard, the duty to be by his side, that kept her going. Day after day, she renewed her strength in the hope that, perhaps, a miracle would happen. On that June afternoon, the New York sky was overcast and the temperature was mild. Helen arrived at the hospital around 2 in the afternoon, as usual. She wore a light beige coat and carried a brown leather purse, where she always kept a book and a bottle of water. She greeted the receptionist with a polite nod and went up to the 10th floor where the VIP wing was located. The security guard in charge of the area knew her well and opened the door without much formality. Helen walked down the silent corridor, her steps echoing softly on the marble floor, until she reached the door of Richard's room. Upon entering, she found the same scene that repeated itself every day. Richard was lying in bed, motionless, his eyes closed and his breathing assisted by machines. His face had a serene look, as if he were just sleeping deeply. Helen approached, placed her purse on the armchair beside him, and gently kissed her husband's forehead. She sat down, took his hand in hers, and began to speak softly, telling him about her day, about the traffic, about a news story she had read in the paper. It was a one-sided conversation, but one she maintained with the same dedication as always. She was about to open the book she had brought when she heard voices outside. They were distinct voices, one of them clearly a child's. Helen frowned, intrigued. Children didn't usually wander around that wing, especially unaccompanied. She got up and walked to the door, opening it slightly to see what was happening. In the hallway near the nurse's station stood a small girl about 7 years old. She was thin with light brown skin and straight brown hair that fell to her shoulders. She wore worn-out jeans, a simple pink shirt, and white sneakers that had seen better days. In her hands, she held a worn blue notebook with crumpled edges and pages that looked like they had been handled many times. The nurse on duty, Teresa, a middle-aged woman in an impeccable uniform, was clearly confused, trying to understand how the child had gotten there. The girl spoke with a surprising calmness, for her age. "My mum used to work here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "She told me that one day I could help her boss come back. I need to see him, please. It's important." Teresa looked around, not sure how to proceed. "Honey, you can't be here. This is a restricted wing. How did you get past security? Who's your mother? Is she with you?" The girl looked down for a moment, and Helen saw a shadow of sadness cross her face. "My mom isn't here anymore," she replied, almost in a whisper. "But before she left, she gave me this notebook and made me promise I would bring it to him. She said Mr. Anderson needed to see what's inside." Helen felt her heart race. "Mr. Anderson?" How did this child know her husband's name? She stepped out of the room and approached them. "Teresa, excuse me," Helen intervened, her voice calm but curious. "What's this about?" The nurse turned, relieved to see Helen. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm so sorry. This little girl just appeared out of nowhere. I'm trying to figure out how she got in. I'm going to call security to take her back." Helen looked at the child, who stared back at her with large dark eyes, full of a seriousness that didn't match her young age. "Wait, Teresa. Let me talk to her first." The nurse hesitated, but eventually agreed with a nod. Helen knelt to be at the girl's level and asked gently, "What's your name?" "Laura," the girl replied. "Laura Miller." "Laura, why did you come here? And what does your mother have to do with my husband?" The girl clutched the notebook to her chest and took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "My mom's name was Joanna. I used to clean Mr. Anderson's house. I went with her sometimes when I was really little. You probably don't remember me, but I remember the house. It was big and had a lot of windows. My mom always said that Mr. Anderson was a good man, but that he carried a lot of sadness in his heart. After the accident, she got really sad too. Before she passed, she gave me this notebook and said that one day I had to bring it to him. She said this could help him come back." Helen felt her legs go weak. Joanna. Yes, she remembered. Joanna had worked for them for a few years. She was a dedicated and always very kind woman. Helen had no idea she had a daughter who sometimes accompanied her, but she vaguely remembered that Joanna had been fired shortly before the accident. At the time, Helen's sister-in-law Beatrice, who helped manage some aspects of the house, claimed that Joanna had made a serious mistake, something related to a valuable item that went missing. Richard, distracted with business, trusted Beatrice's judgment and authorized the dismissal. Helen had always found it strange, but she didn't have the strength to question it at the time. "And your mother?" Helen asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Where is she now?" Laura lowered her head. "She's not here anymore. She got sick, and they couldn't help her in time at the public hospital. But before, she made me promise I would take care of this notebook and that, when I got a little older, I would bring it here. She said Mr. Anderson needed to know that someone still cared, that there were things he couldn't forget." Helen felt her eyes well up. She took Laura's small hands in hers and said, her voice firm but laden with emotion, "You are very brave, Laura. Come with me. I'll take you to him." Teresa tried to protest. "Mrs. Anderson, I don't know if that's appropriate." "It's okay, Teresa. I'll take full responsibility." Helen stood up and extended her hand to Laura, who took it with confidence. The two walked to the room. Helen opened the door slowly and invited Laura to enter. The girl hesitated for a second upon seeing Richard in the bed, surrounded by machines, but then she moved forward with firm steps. She approached the bed and observed the sleeping man's face. "He looks tired," she murmured. "Can I talk to him?" Helen nodded, unable to find words. Laura placed the blue notebook on the bedside table and carefully touched Richard's hand. "Hi, Mr. Anderson. I'm Laura, Joanna's daughter. You probably remember her. She took care of your house. My mom always talked about you. She said you had a good heart, but that sometimes sadness took over. I came to bring you something. My mom kept this with great care. She thought it could help." The moment Laura touched Richard's hand, something happened. The heart monitor, which for 3 years had emitted the same monotonous rhythm, began to show variations. The rate increased slightly. Helen's eyes widened, and she looked at Teresa, who had followed them in. The nurse quickly approached, observing the machines with an astonished expression. "This isn't possible," Teresa muttered. Laura continued talking, as if nothing extraordinary were happening. "My mom always said that love can awaken what pain has put to sleep. She truly believed that. And she wanted you to know that there are people who still believe in you, who still care." One of Richard's fingers twitched. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but Helen saw it. She brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Richard," she whispered. "Richard, can you hear me?" Teresa ran to call the doctor on duty. In a few minutes, the attending neurologist, Dr. Frank Davis, rushed into the room. He was a man in his 60s, with completely white hair and thin-rimmed glasses. He had been following Richard's case from the beginning and had always been honest with Helen about the minimal chances of recovery. Seeing the changes on the monitors, he fell silent, analyzing the data with an expression of disbelief. "This is extraordinary," he said finally. "We haven't seen any significant neurological response in years. What happened here?" Helen pointed to Laura, who was still beside the bed, holding Richard's hand with the innocence of a child, but the seriousness of someone on a mission. "This girl, she came to visit him. She's the daughter of someone who worked for us, and ever since she touched him, the monitors started reacting." Dr. Davis approached Laura and smiled gently. "Can you do that again, honey? Can you talk to him a little more?" Laura nodded. She looked at Richard and continued. "Mr. Anderson, my mom said you had a very special daughter. She said Isabella was a girl full of light, who loved to draw and write. My mom saved some of her things. They're here in the notebook. I think Isabella wanted you to know that she loved you very much." Upon hearing Isabella's name, another of Richard's fingers moved. A faint sigh escaped his lips. Helen began to cry, clinging to the edge of the bed. Dr. Davis asked Teresa to bring more equipment to monitor his brain activity. The medical team began to move around, but Helen barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on her husband's face, searching for any additional sign that he was really there, fighting to come back. Laura continued to hold Richard's hand and speak softly. "My mum told me not to give up on people. She said that sometimes people just need a reason to come back. I don't know if I can be that reason, but I want to try. If you can hear me, please, try to come back. There are a lot of people waiting for you." Dr. Davis, after analyzing the new data, turned to Helen with a mixed expression of caution and hope. "Mrs. Anderson, I've never seen anything like this. The brainwaves are showing activity we haven't registered in years. I can't guarantee anything yet, but this is a sign, a very important sign." Helen hugged the doctor, grateful. Then she knelt beside Laura and said, her voice choked with emotion, "You brought hope into this room, Laura. I don't know how to thank you. Can you come back tomorrow? Can you keep talking to him?" Laura looked at Helen with her serious eyes and nodded. "I can. My mum would have wanted me to do this. She always believed Mr. Anderson was special." Helen hugged the girl, feeling an instant connection with this child who had appeared out of nowhere and brought with her something that medicine couldn't explain. After some time, Laura said she needed to leave before it got dark, as she lived far away in Queens. Helen insisted on giving her a ride and called her driver, Mr. Evans, a trusted man who had worked for the family for decades. During the drive, Laura told them a little more about her life. She lived with an aunt, Monica, who worked as a cook in a diner and did her best to take care of her. Her aunt didn't know that Laura had gone to the hospital alone that day. Laura had taken 2 buses and walked a long way, guided only by the memory of her mother's stories and an address she found on an old piece of paper tucked inside the notebook. When they arrived at the address, a simple house on a narrow, bustling street, Monica came running out, frantic. "Laura, where have you been? I was worried sick." The aunt was a sturdy woman in her 40s with short hair and the tired eyes of someone who worked too much. Seeing Helen and the luxury car, she froze, not understanding. Helen got out of the car and quickly explained the situation. Monica, confused but visibly relieved, thanked her and apologized for her niece's boldness. Helen, however, was firm. "There's nothing to apologize for. Your niece did something extraordinary today, and, if you'll allow it, I'd like her to continue visiting my husband. I believe she can help him recover. I'll have my driver pick her up every day." Monica was speechless. Laura smiled discreetly and held her aunt's hand. Helen got back in the car, and on the way back, she felt an emotion she hadn't experienced in years. It was a mix of hope, gratitude, and a strange feeling that her life was about to change in a way she had never imagined. That night, Helen returned to the hospital. She stayed by Richard's side late, watching the monitors, which now showed a different pattern than what she had grown used to seeing. She held his hand and whispered, "I don't know what that little girl has, Richard, but she brought something back to you. I felt it, and I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure she keeps coming. You need to fight, my love. You need to come back to me." Richard didn't respond, but Helen felt, or wanted to feel, his fingers gently press against hers. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself to truly believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, in the elegant Upper East Side, Beatrice Anderson was on the phone with her husband, Michael Anderson, Richard's cousin. Beatrice was a 45-year-old woman with an impeccable appearance, always dressed in designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Michael, on the other hand, was a 50-year-old mediocre executive who had always lived in the shadow of his cousin's success. Since Richard's accident, the two had taken control of the family business, with a power of attorney that Helen, in her initial despair, had signed without much questioning. Beatrice hung up the phone and frowned. Something was bothering her. Earlier, she had received a call from an acquaintance who worked at the hospital and mentioned that a girl had visited Richard, and that, surprisingly, he had shown reactions. Beatrice didn't like surprises. She and Michael had built a comfortable life managing Richard's business, and the possibility of him waking up was a direct threat to the plans they had been cultivating for years. "Michael, we need to keep an eye on this," she said aloud, as if talking to herself. "If Richard wakes up, everything we've built could fall apart. We need to act fast." At the hospital, Helen had no idea of the forces that were about to mobilize against her. All that mattered, at that moment, was little Laura and the miracle she had brought with her. Helen picked up the blue notebook Laura had left on the bedside table and with trembling hands opened the first page. Inside, she found colorful drawings made with colored pencils and a child's handwriting that she recognized immediately. It was Isabella's handwriting. Helen felt her chest tighten. She began to flip through the pages slowly, discovering notes, confessions, and short stories her daughter had written. Each word was like an embrace from the past, a painful but precious memory. One of the pages read, "Daddy, sometimes I think you get sad when you think no one is looking, but I'm always looking, and I love you so much." Helen closed the notebook and hugged it to her chest, crying silently. That notebook was more than an object. It was a bridge between the past and the present, between pain and hope, between loss and the possibility of rebuilding. And Laura, that little girl of just 7, had been the messenger of that bridge. Outside, the city of New York continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in its many corners. But inside that hospital room, something had changed. A seed of hope had been planted, and Helen was determined to water it until it bloomed, no matter how long it took, no matter what obstacles arose. She would fight for Richard, for Laura, and for the memory of Isabella. And somehow, she knew this fight was just beginning. The following days brought a new routine for Helen. Every morning around 9 o'clock, Mr. Evans would drive to Queens to pick up Laura. The girl was always ready, with her hair combed and clean, though simple clothes. Monica, her aunt, still showed some suspicion about the whole situation, but she gradually began to see Helen's sincerity and the positive change it brought to Laura. The girl who used to spend her days playing alone in the small backyard or helping her aunt with chores now had a purpose that made her wake up with her eyes shining with expectation. At the hospital, Laura's visits quickly became a topic of conversation among the staff. The medical team closely monitored each session, recording Richard's reactions. Dr. Frank Davis, who had initially received the news with scientific skepticism, now coordinated a multidisciplinary team to study the phenomenon. Neurologists, physical therapists, and even psychologists were called in to understand what was happening. Richard's brainwaves showed increasingly active patterns, especially during the moments when Laura was present and talking to him. On her third visit, Laura brought the blue notebook open to a specific page. Helen was sitting in the armchair next to the bed, as always, observing the girl with a mixture of curiosity and restrained emotion. Laura approached Richard, touched his hand gently, and began to read aloud. "Daddy, today I drew a bluebird in my art notebook. The teacher said it was pretty. I thought of you because you always like to see the birds in the garden in the morning. You say they bring hope. I think so too. Love you, Isabella." Laura's voice was soft, yet clear. Helen closed her eyes, feeling the tears stream down. Those were her daughter's words, written years before, in a moment of innocence and happiness that now seemed to belong to another life. But hearing them through Laura in that context brought a strange sense of continuity, as if Isabella were somehow present, sending a message through this child. Richard reacted. His lips moved slightly as if trying to form words. His eyes, though still closed, twitched under his eyelids. The heart monitor sped up. Dr. Davis, who was in the room observing the session, leaned forward, attentive to every detail. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "The brain activity is increasing significantly. It's as if he's trying to respond. Continue, Laura. Please, continue." Laura turned the page of the notebook. There was another drawing, this time of a large house with many windows and a flower-filled garden. Underneath, in neat letters, it was written, "This is our house. It's the happiest place in the world because we're together." Helen sobbed. That house was the mansion where they lived before the accident, in a wealthy suburb, a spacious property with gardens that Isabella loved to explore. After the tragedy, Helen couldn't live there anymore. She sold the property and moved to a smaller, more discreet apartment, where the memories didn't suffocate her at every turn. But seeing that drawing brought it all back with a painful intensity, Laura continued reading Isabella's notes, page by page. Some were small accounts of daily life, others were confessions of feelings, fears, and dreams. One of them caught Helen's attention in a special way. It was written in a slightly more hurried script, as if Isabella had jotted down something important quickly. "Mummy, today I saw Uncle Michael and Aunt Beatrice talking quietly in Daddy's office. They didn't know I was there. I heard Uncle Michael say that Daddy was getting in the way of their plans. I didn't really understand, but I thought it was weird. Why would Daddy get in the way of anything? He always helps everyone." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. That had been written shortly before the accident. She had never seen this note before. Joanna, Laura's mother, must have kept that notebook very carefully, realizing that there might be something important in it. Helen looked at Dr. Davis, who also seemed to have noticed the gravity of those words. "Laura," Helen asked, her voice trembling, "did your mother tell you anything about this? About conversations she might have overheard while working at our house?" Laura thought for a moment. "My mom used to say there were things she heard and didn't understand, but she knew they weren't right. She said that sometimes people do bad things thinking no one is watching, but that there's always someone watching. She never told me details, but she said she kept everything safe, just in case it was needed one day." Helen felt her heart race. Joanna knew something, and if she kept that notebook, maybe she had kept other things too. "Where did your mother keep her important things, Laura?" Laura scratched her head, thoughtful. "She had a shoebox under her bed. That's where she kept papers and photos. After she passed, my aunt put it all away. We never really went through it." Helen looked at Dr. Davis, who understood what she was thinking. "Mrs. Anderson, I think you should investigate this carefully. If there's something relevant, it could be important for understanding not only the accident, but also your husband's current state." Helen agreed, but for now she decided not to interrupt the session. Laura continued reading from the notebook, and Richard kept reacting. With each of Isabella's words, he seemed to respond in some way. His fingers moved, his breathing changed rhythm, and at one point he emitted a low, almost inaudible sound that sent the entire medical team into action. At the end of the afternoon, Laura had to leave. Helen walked her to the car and, before saying goodbye, made a request. "Laura, would it be okay if your aunt and I came to your house tomorrow? I'd like to talk calmly and see the things your mother saved. I think it might be important." Laura agreed without hesitation. "My aunt works until noon on Saturdays. We can see you after that." Helen thanked her and watched Laura leave. She returned to Richard's room and stayed by his side late into the night. She held his hand and spoke softly. "Richard, I know you're trying to come back, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help you. If something was wrong that day, if someone did something that caused the accident, I will find out. I promise." That night, Helen couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing, connecting dots that had previously seemed isolated. Joanna's sudden dismissal, the conversations Isabella had mentioned in the notebook, the behavior of Michael and Beatrice since the accident, always too helpful, always too present, and that power of attorney she had signed without thinking, handing them control of Richard's business. It was all starting to look like part of something bigger, more sinister. The next day, a sunny Saturday, Helen went to Queens. Mr. Evans drove through the bustling streets of the borough, passing by street markets and local shops. It was a stark contrast to the upscale neighborhoods where Helen had always lived, but she observed everything with attention, without judgment. There was life here too, struggle, dignity. When they arrived at Monica's house, Helen got out and was greeted by Laura's aunt, who had prepared a simple but lovingly made coffee. Monica was a woman of few words, but her eyes expressed gratitude. "Mrs. Anderson, I still don't know how to thank you for the attention you've given Laura. This girl has always been special, but since Joanna passed, she's been a bit lost. Now I see her happy again." Helen smiled gently. "Monica, I'm the one who should be thanking you. Your niece is doing something extraordinary for my husband, something that medicine couldn't do in 3 years. And I'd like to know more about Joanna. Laura told me she kept some important things." Monica nodded and led Helen to a small room in the back of the house. It was the room where Laura slept. From under the bed, Monica pulled out a worn shoebox tied with a string. "Joanna was always careful," Monica said. "She didn't talk much about her work, but I knew she liked the Anderson family. She was devastated when she was fired. She said it was unjust that someone had lied about her, but she never had the strength to fight it. She was a humble woman. She didn't know how to stand up to powerful people." Helen took the box carefully and asked for permission to open it. Inside she found papers, old photos, pay stubs, and at the bottom, sealed envelopes. One of them had written, in Joanna's handwriting, "For when the truth needs to come out." Helen opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside there was a handwritten letter and some photos. The letter read, "I, Joanna Maria Miller, worked for the Anderson family for 4 years. I was always treated with respect by Mr. Richard and Mrs. Helen, but I was unjustly accused of theft by Mrs. Beatrice, Mrs. Helen's sister-in-law. I never stole anything. The accusation was made because I overheard conversations I shouldn't have. Conversations between Mr. Michael and Mrs. Beatrice about plans to take over Mr. Richard's business. I heard them talking about how he was in the way. I didn't understand everything, but I felt that something bad was being plotted. I am keeping this letter in case it is ever needed. May God protect that family." Helen felt her legs give way. Monica held her by the arm and helped her sit on the bed. The photos showed documents that Joanna had secretly photographed. They were contracts, printed emails, and notes that mentioned suspicious financial transfers. Helen wasn't an expert, but she could tell that it involved embezzling funds from Richard's company. "I need to take this with me," Helen said, her voice firm. "I need to show it to a lawyer. Monica, do you trust me?" Monica nodded. "Joanna always spoke well of you. I trust you. Do what you need to do." Helen thanked her and hugged Monica. She looked at Laura, who was watching everything with her serious and curious eyes. "You are braver than you know, Laura. Your mother would be so proud of you." Laura smiled discreetly. "My mom always said that the truth needs courage to appear. I think it's appearing now." Helen returned home with the shoebox and immediately called her trusted lawyer, Mr. Anthony Carter, a 65-year-old man, experienced and discreet. Anthony had been a family friend for decades and had always been loyal. Helen scheduled an urgent meeting for the following Monday and asked him to come to her apartment where they could talk in private. Meanwhile, on the Upper East Side, Beatrice received a call from an acquaintance who worked in the hospital's administration. The woman, whom Beatrice kept informed with discreet payments, brought worrying news. "Mrs. Anderson, Mrs. Helen is very close to that girl who showed up, and I heard she's been talking to Dr. Davis about possibilities for Mr. Anderson's recovery. It seems she's genuinely hopeful." Beatrice hung up the phone and called Michael. He was in the home office they had set up to manage Richard's business. Michael was a man of average height, with thinning hair combed to the side and a constantly tense expression. He had always lived in the shadow of his more successful cousin, and the last 3 years had been the best of his life. He finally had power, recognition, and access to a fortune he had never been able to build on his own. "We need to do something," Beatrice said, crossing her arms. "If Richard wakes up, everything will fall apart. He'll want to know everything. He'll audit the accounts. He'll discover the embezzlement. We can't let that happen." Michael rubbed his face, nervous. "What do you suggest? We can't just stop the girl from visiting him. Helen has already grown attached to her, and the hospital is allowing it. If we try to block it, we'll raise suspicion." Beatrice thought for a moment. "Maybe it's time to speed up the process of having him declared legally incompetent. We can claim that Helen is not in an emotional state to make decisions about Richard. We take full legal guardianship and can limit visits as we see fit." Michael hesitated. "That could be risky. Helen is stronger than she looks. What if she hires a lawyer?" "She probably already has one," Beatrice said impatiently. "But we have resources, Michael. We have influence. We can make things difficult for her. We need to act before it's too late." The two began to devise a plan, unaware that Helen was already several steps ahead. On Monday, Mr. Carter arrived at Helen's apartment with a leather briefcase and a serious expression. Helen showed him all the documents she had found in Joanna's box, as well as the blue notebook with Isabella's notes. Anthony read everything carefully, taking notes and frowning at various points. "Mrs. Anderson, this is very serious," he said finally. "If what's in here is true, and I believe it is, we're talking about fraud, embezzlement, and possibly even intentional sabotage. Your husband's accident may not have been an accident." Helen felt a tightness in her chest. "I always thought it was strange, Anthony. Richard was a careful driver. He never drove recklessly, especially with Isabella in the car. And that day the weather was bad, but not bad enough to justify an accident of that severity," Anthony continued. "We need more proof. We need a forensic examination of the vehicle, if there's any evidence left. And we need witnesses, someone who can corroborate this information." Helen remembered something. The family's old driver, Mr. Paul. He worked with us for years and left shortly after the accident. At the time I thought he had retired, but I always had the impression there was more to it. He was very attached to Richard. It didn't make sense for him to leave right after all that. Anthony made a note. "I'll try to locate him. If he knows something, he could be the missing piece. In the meantime, I'm going to file a motion to suspend the power of attorney you gave to Michael and Beatrice. I'll allege financial irregularities and request a full audit of the company's business." Helen agreed. "Do whatever it takes, Anthony. I want justice. For Richard, for Isabella, and for Joanna, who lost her life trying to protect the truth." In the following days, things began to move. Anthony managed to track down Paul, the former driver, who was living in an upstate New York town near Albany. He agreed to meet with Helen and the lawyer. When they met, Paul, a 70-year-old man with white hair and tired eyes, revealed something that changed everything. "I left the Andersons' house because I was scared," Paul said, his voice choked with emotion. "I knew something was wrong with that car. Days before the accident, I saw Mr. Michael messing around under the hood. When I asked him about it, he said he was just checking the oil, but it seemed strange to me. After the accident, I went to the police station, but I didn't have the courage to say anything. I was a simple employee with no proof, no power. Who would believe me against an influential man like Mr. Michael? So I ran. I took my retirement and came up here trying to forget, but the guilt never left me. Helen held the man's hand. You're not to blame, Paul. You were scared, and that's understandable. But now I need your help. I need you to testify about what you saw. I need the truth to come out. Paul hesitated, but seeing the determination in Helen's eyes, he agreed. I'll do it. For Mr. Anderson and for little Isabella. They didn't deserve what happened. With Paul's testimony, Mr. Carter filed a formal complaint with the authorities. He requested the reopening of the accident investigation and asked for a forensic examination of the vehicle's remains, which were still stored in a police impound lot. The wheels of justice began to turn, slowly, but with determination. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Richard continued to improve. He could now open his eyes for brief moments and moved his arms with more frequency. Dr. Davis was enthusiastic. I've never seen anything like it. It's as if he's rediscovering the way back. And the girl's presence is fundamental. I can't explain it scientifically, but the connection is undeniable. Laura continued her daily visits, always reading from the blue notebook, talking to Richard, telling him stories about her life and what her mother had taught her. Helen realized she was developing a deep affection for the child. Laura had something special, a purity and a strength that touched anyone's heart. And Helen began to consider something that would have seemed impossible before. What if Laura stayed with her? What if she could offer the girl a better life with opportunities that Monica, as dedicated as she was, couldn't provide? One afternoon, Helen spoke to Monica about it. I know this might seem sudden, but I'd like to help Laura in a more permanent way. She's doing so much for my husband, and I feel there's a bond between us. I'd like to propose that she come live with me. I can offer her an education, care, everything she needs. And you, of course, would always be welcome. Laura would never lose contact with you. Monica was surprised but not offended. It was clear from her face that she knew the limitations she faced. Mrs. Anderson, I love that girl more than anything, but I know I can't give her what she deserves. If you promise to take good care of her, to respect Joanna's memory, and to let me continue to be a part of her life, I accept. Laura deserves a better chance. Helen hugged Monica, moved. I promise. I'll take care of her as if she were my own daughter. When Helen told Laura about the possibility, the girl was silent for a long moment. Then she asked, Will Aunt Monica be sad? Helen smiled. Your aunt wants what's best for you, Laura, and we'll make sure she's always present. You'll visit her all the time, and she'll visit you. Your love for each other won't change. Laura thought a little more and then nodded. I'd like that. I like being with you, and I think my mum would like it too. Helen felt her eyes well up. So while she prepared the legal paperwork for Laura's guardianship, she also closely followed the developments of the accident investigation. Things were about to explode, and she knew that Michael and Beatrice wouldn't stay quiet. The battle was just beginning, but Helen was ready. Ready to fight for the truth, for justice, and for the family she was building in a way she had never imagined. The news that Helen had hired a lawyer and requested an audit of the company's business hit Michael and Beatrice like a punch to the gut. They were in the luxurious office they occupied in the commercial building on Park Avenue, where Anderson Tech Solutions was headquartered. Michael held an official subpoena, his hands visibly shaking. Beatrice paced back and forth, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She's challenging us, Beatrice said, her voice sharp. Helen was always weak, always the submissive wife who accepted everything. Where did this sudden courage come from? Michael dropped the letter on the desk and loosened his tie. I don't know, but this is bad. Very bad. If the auditors start going through the books, they'll find everything. The transfers to offshore accounts, the inflated contracts with shell companies, the embezzlement, everything. Beatrice stopped pacing and stared intently at her husband. Then we need to act fast. We need to discredit Helen, make it seem like she's emotionally unstable, that she's being manipulated by this girl who appeared out of nowhere. We'll question her ability to make decisions about Richard. Michael hesitated. Beatrice, if we push too hard, we might draw even more attention. And there's that story about the driver. If he shows up talking about the accident, we're done for. Beatrice walked to the window, watching the frantic movement of the city below. She had always been an ambitious woman, raised in a middle-class family that struggled to keep up appearances. Marrying Michael, even though he was just a distant cousin of a wealthy man, was her way of climbing the social ladder. And when Richard had his accident, she saw the opportunity to finally live the life she had always wanted. She wasn't going to give it up without a fight. We'll contact our lawyer, she decided. We'll contest this audit, claim it's an abuse, that Helen is acting on impulse, and we'll investigate this girl. Who is she really? Where did she come from? There must be something we can use against her. Meanwhile, in Helen's apartment, Laura was adjusting to her new routine. Helen had prepared a room for her, decorated simply but warmly with a comfortable bed, a desk for studying, and shelves for books. Laura looked at everything with wide eyes, still processing the change in her life. Monica came to visit twice a week, and the transition was being handled with care and respect for everyone's feelings. Helen enrolled Laura in a nearby private school, where the girl would have access to a quality education. In the first few days, Laura was intimidated by her classmates, most of whom came from wealthy families, but her intelligence and gentle personality soon won them over. One teacher in particular, Mrs. Clark, noticed the girl's potential and began to encourage her, offering extra books and activities that stimulated her natural curiosity. The hospital visits continued religiously. Now Helen and Laura went together every afternoon. Richard was making remarkable progress. He could now keep his eyes open for longer periods and responded to stimuli with more coordinated movements. Dr. Davis had started intensive physical therapy sessions, and the entire team was optimistic about the possibility of a full, or at least significant, recovery. One of these afternoons, Laura was reading another page from the blue notebook when Richard did something that surprised everyone. He moved his hand toward hers and, with visible effort, held her fingers. Laura stopped reading and looked at him, moved. "You're really listening to me," she whispered. Richard opened his eyes slowly. His gaze was hazy, confused, but when it met Laura's face, something inside him seemed to awaken. He tried to speak, but only a murmur came out. Laura leaned her ear closer. "Mr. Anderson, I didn't understand. Can you try again?" With immense effort, Richard whispered, "Who? You?" Laura smiled with tears in her eyes. "I'm Laura, the daughter of Joanna, who used to work at your house. I came to bring you memories of Isabella." Upon hearing his daughter's name, Richard closed his eyes tightly and a tear rolled down his face. Helen, who was watching closely, approached and held her husband's other hand. "Richard, it's me, Helen. You're coming back, my love. You're making it." Richard opened his eyes again and looked at his wife. He recognized her. His lips moved, forming her name, though no sound came out. Helen cried, hugging him carefully so as not to disconnect the machines. Dr. Davis, who was monitoring everything, made detailed notes and called in more specialists to evaluate the case. "We are witnessing something extraordinary," he told the team. "Not just a neurological recovery, but a deep emotional reconnection. It's as if love and memories are pulling him back to consciousness." In the following days, Richard began to articulate short words. Water, pain, home, Isabella. Each word was an achievement, celebrated by the team and by Helen as a victory. Laura continued to be an essential part of the process. Whenever she was present, Richard was more responsive, more determined to fight. Meanwhile, Mr. Anthony Carter worked tirelessly on the investigation. The forensic examination of the vehicle's wreckage confirmed what Paul had suspected. The brakes had been sabotaged. The parts showed signs of intentional interference, something that would not have been caused by natural wear or an accident. The report was clear. Someone had tampered with the braking system to fail under conditions of high speed or on steep descents, exactly as had happened on the parkway that rainy day. The audit of the company's business revealed serious irregularities. fictitious contracts, unauthorized transfers, embezzlement totaling millions of dollars. Michael had used the power of attorney to create a sophisticated scheme of misappropriation, always careful to leave few clues, but not careful enough to escape a thorough investigation. Anthony presented all the evidence to the district attorney's office, which opened a formal inquiry. Search and seizure warrants were issued. On a Thursday morning, NYPD detectives arrived at Michael and Beatrice's office with court orders. Computers were seized, documents collected, employees questioned. The news spread quickly through New York's business sector, and the Anderson name, once synonymous with success and integrity, was now associated with scandal. Michael and Beatrice were summoned for questioning. Beatrice, always calculating, hired the best lawyers the embezzled money could buy. They denied everything, claiming they were victims of a persecution driven by a desperate and emotionally unstable widow. But the evidence was too solid to be ignored. Paul, the former driver, gave a formal testimony. He described Michael's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to the accident, how he was around the car for no apparent reason. A mechanic who had worked in the family's garage was also located and confirmed that Michael had asked for technical information about the brake system months before the accident, claiming he wanted to better understand how the vehicle worked. At the time, it seemed innocent. Now, in light of the facts, it took on a sinister meaning. Helen followed everything closely, but her priority remained Richard and Laura. She knew that justice would run its course, but what really mattered was her husband's recovery and the well-being of the girl who had become so important in her life. Richard, for his part, showed daily progress. He could now pronounce simple, complete sentences. "Where? Isabella?" was the first question he asked clearly, when he finally regained enough consciousness to articulate thoughts. Helen held his hand tightly, preparing to deliver the news she knew would destroy him. "Richard, my love, Isabella is no longer with us. She passed away. In the same accident that left you like this. I'm so sorry, my love, I'm so sorry." Richard closed his eyes, absorbing the information. Silent tears rolled down his face. Helen hugged him, crying with him. Laura, who was present, approached and gently touched his arm. "Mr. Anderson, Isabella left many beautiful things behind. She left drawings, stories, words of love. She wanted you to know how much she loved you." Richard opened his eyes and looked at Laura. For the first time, he truly saw her. He observed her features, her gentle expression, her eyes full of compassion. "Who are you?" Laura explained patiently, who she was, who her mother had been, and how she had come to be there. Richard listened to everything, processing each word slowly. When she finished, he held the girl's hand and said, his voice weak but sincere, "Thank you for coming back. For me." Laura smiled. "My mom used to say that love awakens what pain has put to sleep. I believe that." Dr. Davis decided it was time to confront Richard with the full reality of his situation. He explained about the coma, about the 3 years that had passed, about the state of the company, and carefully about the ongoing investigations. Richard absorbed it all with a grave expression. When he learned of the sabotage, his reaction was one of disbelief, followed by contained anger. "Michael did this?" he asked with difficulty. "The evidence points to that, yes," Helen replied. "He and Beatrice planned everything. They wanted control of the company and your fortune. And Joanna, Laura's mother, discovered part of the plan. That's why she was unjustly fired. She saved proof, Richard. Proof that is now in the hands of the authorities." Richard took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. The intensive physical therapy was helping him regain movement, but he was still weak, dependent on help for basic tasks. But his mind was becoming clearer, and the determination in his eyes was evident. "I want to see everything," he said. "I want to understand." Anthony was called to the hospital and in a private meeting presented Richard with all the documents, evidence, and testimonies collected. Richard listened to everything in silence, his expression growing darker. When Anthony finished, Richard closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "My daughter," died. Because of them, he said, his voice choked. Isabella died because I trusted the wrong man. Helen held his hands. You're not to blame, Richard. They deceived us. They deceived everyone. Richard opened his eyes, and in them was a steely determination. I will testify. I will tell everything. I know they will pay. Anthony agreed. Your testimony will be crucial, Mr. Anderson. But for now, focus on your recovery. We need you to be strong enough to give a formal deposition. In the following weeks, Richard made impressive progress. With intensive physical therapy and the emotional support of Helen and Laura, he managed to sit up in bed, then stand with assistance, and eventually take his first shaky steps. Each achievement was celebrated as a miracle, because it truly was. Laura never missed a visit. She and Richard developed a special bond. He saw her as an angel sent to save him, and she saw him as a father figure who had been snatched from death. Helen watched the relationship between them with deep emotion and gratitude. One afternoon, while Laura was reading to Richard, he interrupted her. Laura, can I ask you a question? Of course, Mr. Anderson. You're like her, like Isabella, not physically, but in your spirit, in the light you carry. Would you like to be our daughter, officially? Laura's eyes widened in surprise. Helen, who was beside them, smiled through tears. She had talked to Richard about the possibility of adopting Laura, but she had expected him to recover more before making this decision. Apparently, Richard had already made up his mind. Laura looked from Richard to Helen, processing the invitation. I'd love to, she said finally, her voice choked with emotion. But are you sure? Absolutely, Helen said. You brought back not just Richard, but also hope. You gave us a reason to keep going. We want you to be part of our family. Laura smiled, tears rolling down her face. Then, yes, I accept. Richard extended his still weak arms, and Laura moved closer. He hugged her with all the strength he could muster. Helen joined the hug, and the three of them stood there, intertwined, forming a new family born from the ashes of tragedy. Dr. Davis, watching from a distance, commented to Teresa, You know, in all my years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this. Science explains a lot, but there are forces that go beyond what we can measure. Love is one of them. Meanwhile, the net was closing in on Michael and Beatrice. More evidence was found, including deleted emails that were recovered by forensic experts. In one, Michael discussed with a questionable mechanic how to cause a mechanical failure that would look accidental. In another, Beatrice mentioned that they needed to act soon before Richard discovered the financial diversions. Confronted with the evidence, their lawyers tried to negotiate plea deals, but the district attorney's office was unyielding. The charges were too serious: attempted murder, grand larceny, fraud. Michael and Beatrice were formally indicted and awaited trial. The news made headlines. The newspapers were filled with stories about the scandal in the Anderson family. Richard, now recovered enough to follow the news, felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and relief. Anger for what Michael and Beatrice had done. Sadness for the loss of Isabella. Relief that the truth was finally coming out. Helen, for her part, focused on rebuilding their lives, with Richard improving every day, and Laura now officially in her care while they awaited the finalization of the adoption process. She felt she was finally emerging from the dark tunnel she had inhabited. For the past 3 years, Laura continued to attend school and excelled in all her subjects. Her teacher, Mrs. Clark, was deeply touched when she learned the girl's story and became an important mentor in her life. Laura spoke openly about her desire to become a doctor one day, inspired by her experience with Richard and the love her mother had for helping people. On a quiet evening, as they had dinner together in the apartment, Richard looked at Helen and Laura and said, his voice still a bit hesitant but much firmer than weeks before, I lost so much. I lost my daughter. I lost years of my life, but I gained you. I gained a second chance, and I'm going to make it count. Helen held his hand. We'll do it together, my love. We'll build something new, something good. Laura, sitting between them, smiled. My mom always said that after the storm comes the calm, and that we have to learn to dance in the rain while we wait for the sun. I think we're learning. Richard smiled, for the first time in a long time, a genuine smile full of hope. The three of them sat there, sharing a moment of peace and unity, knowing that challenges still lay ahead, but ready to face them together, as a family. 6 months had passed since Richard had awakened from his coma. The autumn in New York painted the trees in shades of orange, and the city seemed to breathe more calmly on that April afternoon. Richard stood, unassisted, on the balcony of Helen's apartment, watching the distant movement on Fifth Avenue. His hair, now completely white, was neatly trimmed, and he wore casual but elegant clothes. His physical recovery had been remarkable, and although he still felt occasional pain and tired more quickly than before, he was alive, conscious and determined. Laura was sitting in the living room, focused on her school books, her tongue sticking out slightly in total concentration. At 8 years old, she was already a grade ahead of her age. Such was her dedication to her studies. Helen was making coffee in the kitchen, humming a soft tune to an old song Richard used to like. The scene was one of quiet domesticity, a peace won after so much suffering. The phone rang and Helen answered. It was Mr. Anthony Carter. Mrs. Anderson, I have news. The trial has been scheduled. It will be in 3 weeks. The judge has accepted all the evidence we presented, and the DA is confident. Richard will need to testify, but I believe we're ready. Helen thanked him and hung up. She walked to the balcony and relayed the information to her husband. Richard nodded, his expression serious. I'm ready. I need to do this. For Isabella. For us. For everything they destroyed. The following weeks were of intense preparation. Richard worked with Anthony to organize his testimony, recalling details from the months leading up to the accident, conversations he had with Michael, signs he should have noticed but ignored because he trusted his cousin. It was painful to relive it all, but necessary. Laura, sensing the growing tension at home, made a point of bringing lightness. She told funny stories from school, showed him drawings she made, and read poems she wrote in a new notebook Helen had given her. She understood, with a wisdom that seemed beyond her years, that her presence was a constant reminder of hope and renewal. The day of the trial arrived. The New York County Criminal Court was packed. Journalists, onlookers, and people connected to the case filled every available space. Michael and Beatrice entered in handcuffs, escorted by police officers. Beatrice, who had always been vain and impeccable, now looked visibly worn, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and hair that had lost its former shine. Michael walked with his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Richard entered accompanied by Helen and Anthony. He still walked with some difficulty, leaning on a cane, but his posture was upright and dignified. When Michael saw him, he immediately looked away, unable to face the cousin he had betrayed so vilely. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses were heard, evidence was presented, technical reports were debated. Paul, the former driver, described Michael's suspicious behavior in detail. The mechanic who had provided technical information about brakes testified, confirming their conversations. The auditors presented spreadsheets and documents proving the multi-million-dollar embezzlement, and then it was time for Richard's testimony. He took the witness stand with effort, but with determination. The prosecutor, District Attorney Robert Fisher, an experienced man in his 50s, conducted the questioning with respect and precision. Richard spoke about his relationship with Michael, about how he had always tried to help his cousin, offering him jobs and opportunities in the company. He talked about how he trusted him, how he had never suspected betrayal. When it came time to talk about the accident, Richard's voice broke. I was coming back from the Berkshires with my daughter Isabella. It was a trip we took sometimes, just the two of us, father-daughter time. The road was wet, but nothing that would justify what happened. I tried to brake when I realized we were going too fast for the curve, but the brakes didn't respond. I tried again and again, nothing. The car went off the road and rolled over. I heard my daughter scream, and then just darkness. I woke up 3 years later and found out she didn't survive. I found out that my own cousin, a member of my family, had planned my death and ended up taking the life of my innocent daughter. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the journalist stopped taking notes, absorbing the magnitude of his testimony. Helen, in the audience, cried silently. Laura, who had insisted on being present despite Helen's attempts to spare her, held the hand of a social worker, her eyes welling with tears. Michael's lawyer tried to question Richard, to insinuate that perhaps he was confused due to the brain trauma, but the prosecutor objected and the judge sustained it. Richard was lucid, his medical exams proved it, and his testimony was consistent with all the material evidence. Beatrice was called to testify but refused to speak, invoking her right to remain silent. Michael, under pressure, ended up confessing to part of the financial scheme but vehemently denied sabotaging the car. He claimed someone else must have done it, perhaps one of Richard's business rivals, but the evidence was too clear, and his defense sounded desperate and empty. On the third day, after the closing arguments from the prosecution and defense, the jury retired to deliberate. It took them 4 hours. When they returned, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The judge asked for the verdict. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a grave expression, stood up. On the charges of attempted murder in the first degree, grand larceny and fraud, we find the defendants, Michael Anderson and Beatrice Anderson, guilty on all counts. A murmur swept through the room. Beatrice collapsed into sobs. Michael remained, motionless, as if he still couldn't process what he had just heard. The judge banged his gavel, ordering silence, and proceeded with the sentencing. Considering the gravity of the crimes, the premeditation, the tragic outcome that included the loss of an innocent life, and the prolonged suffering inflicted upon the victims, I sentence Michael Anderson to 25 years to life in prison, and Beatrice Anderson, as a co-conspirator and accomplice, to 20 years to life in prison. Furthermore, all assets acquired with embezzled funds will be seized and returned to Anderson Tech Solutions. Helen hugged Richard tightly. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of injustice finally being balanced. There was no joy in the victory, only a deep sense of justice served and the possibility of moving forward. When they left the courthouse, they were surrounded by reporters. Richard, with Helen by his side and Laura slightly behind, protected by security, stopped and made a brief statement. Justice was served today, but no sentence will bring my daughter back. What I can do now is honor her memory by building something good from this pain. That is what I intend to do for the rest of my life. In the following months, Richard focused on rebuilding his company and his life. Many employees who had been let go or harmed by Michael's actions were rehired. A full audit was conducted, and the company got back on track, more transparent and ethical than ever. Richard resumed the presidency, but delegated many duties, knowing he needed time to care for his health and his new family. Laura's adoption was finally finalized. In a simple but emotional ceremony at the courthouse, Laura officially became Laura Anderson, daughter of Richard and Helen. Monica was present, crying with joy and pride. The aunt and niece hugged for a long time, and Monica whispered in the girl's ear, "Your mother would be so proud of you, my dear, so proud." Richard and Helen decided to honor Isabella's memory in a concrete and lasting way. They founded the Isabella Anderson Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing free access to medical treatments and emotional support for low-income families facing health crises. The institute also offered scholarships to talented young people from underserved communities, especially those interested in medicine and healthcare fields. The institute's first scholarship recipient was, naturally, Laura, although she was still too young for college. The institute funded her studies and prepared her for a future in medicine. Laura, inspired by her experience with Richard and her mother's story, already knew exactly what she wanted to do: become a neurologist and study ways to help coma patients recover. The years passed. Laura grew into a brilliant, dedicated, and compassionate young woman. At 17, she was accepted into the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, one of the most prestigious in the country. Her performance was exceptional from the start. Professors commented on her natural ability to connect with patients, to see them beyond their symptoms, to treat them with humanity. During her neurology residency, Laura developed a particular interest in altered states of consciousness. Her master's thesis was on the importance of emotional stimulation in the recovery of coma patients. She documented cases, including Richard's, and proposed protocols that combined traditional medicine with emotional and psychological approaches. Her research made an impact in the scientific community. Many doctors, initially skeptical, began to consider that perhaps there was something beyond technical procedures that could make a difference. Laura never forgot her roots. She regularly visited Queens, where Monica still lived, now retired, but happy. Laura brought supplies, talked with neighbors, and offered free medical consultations in the community. It was her way of giving back, of honoring Joanna's memory, and of staying connected to who she was. Richard, now in his 60s, had completely retired from the company, passing it on to trusted managers. He dedicated his time to the Isabella Anderson Institute and to giving talks on business ethics and overcoming adversity. His story inspired many. Helen, always by his side, had returned to teaching literature, now as a volunteer in public schools. The couple traveled occasionally, visiting places they had always wanted to see, and cherished every moment together. On a special evening, the Isabella Anderson Institute hosted a charity dinner. Laura, now a fully qualified neurologist, was invited to give a speech. She walked onto the stage, elegant in a blue dress that recalled the color of the notebook that had changed everything, and looked out at the audience filled with doctors, business leaders, and philanthropists. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Anderson, and I am here today not just as a doctor, but as someone who witnessed a miracle. When I was 7 years old, my mother, Joanna, gave me a blue notebook and made me a promise. She said that notebook held important stories, and that one day I would need to deliver it to someone special. That someone was Richard Anderson, a man who was trapped in a deep coma, cut off from the world and everyone he loved. Laura paused, emotional. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but my mother believed in something powerful, that love can awaken what pain has put to sleep. And she was right. By reading to Richard the words written by his daughter Isabella, by connecting the past with the present, something happened. He began to come back, not just neurologically but emotionally, spiritually. The audience was silent, captivated. Over the years, I studied medicine and specialized in neurology because I wanted to scientifically understand what happened. And I discovered something fascinating. The human brain responds to emotional stimuli in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. Love, memory, human connection. They are not just abstract feelings. They have real measurable power. They can activate areas of the brain that medication alone cannot reach. Laura looked at Richard and Helen sitting in the front row. My adoptive father is here today because science did its part. Yes, but also because love did its part. And my mission as a doctor and as the daughter of two extraordinary women, Joanna and Helen, is to continue proving that the most effective medicine is that which treats the whole human being, body, mind, and heart. The applause was enthusiastic. Laura continued, That is why I am announcing today the creation of a pilot program at the Isabella Anderson Institute. We will work with patients in comatose or minimally conscious states, offering not only medical treatment, but also emotional therapy. We will involve families, create protocols for effective stimulation, and document everything scientifically. We want to prove that love isn't just beautiful in theory, it's effective in practice. More applause. Tears on the faces of many present, Laura concluded. This institute bears Isabella's name because she, even though she is no longer with us, still inspires lives. Her story, her words, her love continue to heal. And that is how it should be. The memory of those we love doesn't have to be just pain. It can also be purpose, it can also be hope. Thank you. Richard stood up, giving a standing ovation, followed by Helen and then the entire audience. Laura came down from the stage and was embraced by her parents. The three of them stood there, intertwined, a picture of resilience, love, and reconstruction. Years later, Laura's program gained international recognition. Doctors from various countries visited the institute to learn the protocols. Scientific articles were published in prestigious journals. Cases of recovery were documented, showing that the combination of advanced medicine with emotional care truly made a difference. Laura married Philip, a dedicated physical therapist she had met during her residency. They had 2 children, a girl they named Joanna, in honor of Laura's biological mother, and a boy they named Gabriel. Richard and Helen were present and loving grandparents, showering the children with affection and stories. On a quiet afternoon, now elderly but still active, Richard and Helen sat in the garden of the new house they had bought, a cozy place far from the city noise. Laura was visiting with her children. The kids played while the adults talked. Richard looked at Laura and said, his voice soft but firm, "You know you saved my life, don't you?" Laura smiled. "We saved each other, Dad. I was lost after my mom passed. You gave me a family, a purpose, a future." Helen added, "And you gave us hope when we had none left." "God works in mysterious ways, Laura. He put you in our path exactly when we needed you most." Richard agreed. "Isabella would have loved you, I'm sure of it." Laura felt her eyes well up. "I feel like somehow she's here with us. In the choices we make, in the love we share, in the good we try to do. She's still alive through all of this." The three of them sat in silence. For a moment, watching the children play, feeling the gentle afternoon breeze, grateful for all they had overcome and achieved. Life hadn't been easy. The pain had been real and profound. But so had the love. And in the end, it was love that prevailed. Laura picked up the old blue notebook, which she kept as a relic, and opened it to a specific page. She read aloud, as she had done so many times before. "If one day I'm no longer here, I want you to know that I loved every moment we lived together. Love is the only thing that remains. It's the only thing that matters. Isabella." Richard and Helen, each holding one of Laura's hands, cried and smiled at the same time, because they understood, finally, the depth of those words. Love truly was the only thing that remained. It crossed death, time, pain. It transformed tragedies into purpose. It brought light to the darkness. It awakened what pain had put to sleep. And so, in that quiet garden, surrounded by love and gratitude, Richard, Helen, and Laura celebrated not just survival, but the victory of the human spirit over all adversity. A victory built with patience, faith, and above all, love. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard, Helen, and Laura has deeply touched your heart. If you are moved by this journey of overcoming justice and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it Laura's courage in showing up at the hospital, Helen's fight for the truth, or Richard's miraculous recovery? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing how love can transform even the most painful situations into something beautiful. We'll see you in the next episode, where a new story will move you, inspire you, and make you reflect on the power of love and hope.